David Elliott is a PhD candidate in Criminology at the University of Ottawa's Centre for Law, Technology and Society, and a 2022-2025 Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation Scholar. His research has earned him numerous academic awards, and outside academia, he is active in both the arts and activism. Diagnosed with reading and writing dysgraphia in grade 3, he attributes his success to the opportunities that he received, opportunities that are often denied to many with dyslexia. Today, he joins us to share his inspiring journey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you've excelled in fields that demand high levels of reading comprehension and writing. You've written a stage show, you produced a short film, authored a book, and pursued post-secondary studies in social theory. You also received the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation PhD scholarship, and yet you've mentioned feeling frustrated and disenchanted by how people in positions of power sometimes react when they learn that you are dyslexic. And can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, of course. And I just want to cycle back to something real quick here. The film was produced by Kimchi Productions. I personally wrote it and was a co-director, but I feel like it's important to give credit where credit is due there. But yeah, to your question here, I know that when most people react when they find out I'm dyslexic, that they are very well-meaning about what they say, and most people have very good reactions. But the reaction I tend to get, which frustrates me a little bit, is when people treat it as if I am something special, that I have overcome something by my own force of will, by my own hard work, by my own effort to get to where I am now. And it frustrates me because, as I'm sure we're going to discuss throughout this interview, I've had a lot of support. I was very fortunate. I got diagnosed very early. My mother knew exactly what to do. I had 2 older brothers who had gone through the system before me. So by the time I went through it, my life was set aside quite a bit easier for me. I was given all the supports I needed. Because both my older brothers were very successful, a lot of teachers didn't give me the same stigma other kids had. They were like, well, the first 2 Elliots were brilliant. The third one will be smart as well, we hope at least. And that led to me having quite an easier path than most people with dyslexia. So when I hear that, I know it's a compliment, and I know people mean it as a compliment. But it frustrates me because I know that if most of the kids that had dyslexia were given the same experiences as me, they would be there. They would have succeeded just as much as I did. And it's the fact that they aren't given those opportunities that it looks so spectacular that I've made it here. It looks so amazing that I've managed to do these things. And I like to think of myself more as just evidence that if you give someone the support they need, if we change the system and make it so it's more supporting of people with learning disabilities and learning differences, that we can do these things, that these things are possible, not by any pure brute force of my own.
Well, giving credit where credit is due, I suppose. Now, you talked about your 2 older brothers having this as well. Can we just go back to, I guess, the beginning and what your diagnosis was, and then I guess maybe you can get into a little bit more detail about how you were helped along by your supportive family and the teachers around you.
Yeah, so my oldest brother, who's 4 years older than me, was the first of us to be diagnosed. I think they got him around grade 6. So very quickly, both me and my middle brother were given diagnostic tests as well. I was quite young at the time. I was grade 3. So my understanding of it is that at that point, they were able to diagnose that I had all the telltale signs of dyslexia. I was dyslexic. But because I was so young, I needed to go back in for another test when I was in grade 6, which gave me the official diagnosis to get all of my accommodations. But all the teachers knew because of that, and my family knew that these were the learning difficulties that I was going to have. One of the big pieces of support was my mother took time away from work when we were diagnosed and provided part-time homeschooling. So I went to a normal public school. But because she understood that the public school system at that time, because of funding, because of education, not by any fault of the teachers, wasn't prepared to deal with people with our learning challenges, that we needed a bit of extra help. So I got extra help in mathematics, I got extra help in reading, got extra help in writing to make sure I built those core foundations at the beginning, the foundations in your educational journey, which in many ways define what the rest of your education is going to look like. I remember I got to do specialized reading courses because I had a bit more trouble with reading. So I remember getting to go and learn phonics for the first time because they weren't teaching phonics in school at that point. And having my reading just completely change, having that feeling for the first time of understanding how to sound out words and understanding how sentences are put together. And that was a really transformational experience. And then with teachers, I had a lot of amazing teachers coming up. Again, I'm lucky. I'll be honest, with my whole journey, it's quite different than most people with dyslexia. I never realized that there was a lot of stigma around it, a lot of stigma against me. It was really funny because I went back and visited my old high school for an event. It would have been like 2 years ago now. And a teacher I'll talk about here in a second actually opened up to me that some of the teachers at the school had doubts about my intellectual abilities because of my dyslexia, or if I would be, ready to go to university. And to hear that from him, that's how some people might have felt about me, was really interesting because personally I never experienced that. But he was really helpful in me when I look back on it now and I really dissect it in the past tense, that I didn't like English. I didn't like writing. I never thought I would be a writer by any means. I never thought I would, be reading for the rest of my life. And one of the big things he did, his name was Charles McDonald. We weren't allowed to call him Mr. McDonald. We had to call him Charles. And he was my English teacher for 3 years. And at that point in English classes, I didn't really read the books because I didn't really have the capability to read and analyze at a high level. I didn't understand how to do it. And what he did was he would give me movies. I remember him giving me the Lord of the Rings films and telling me to watch them. And then we'd have a conversation about them and about how the stories were put together, about how the story of Lord of the Rings was very similar to the story of Star Wars. Why is that? And he got me into Joseph Campbell, who did The Hero of a Thousand Faces, which dissects how stories in English are put together. And I started learning that English didn't have to be this formulaic, like what is a hyperbole, where does a comma go in a sentence. It was this much more exciting experience that some kids get from that form of learning. But he recognized I wasn't going to fall in love with literature. I wasn't going to fall in love with reading with that type of education, and really provided me the space and the platform to explore these ideas and fall in love with it, and then start reading and start doing what to me was the more difficult side of it. Because I had this passion for it, I was willing to put in the work and sit down with The Great Gatsby and try and parse through that, or sit down and try and read Heart of Darkness, which I still have not finished for the life of me. That one's still a bit too hard for me. But he gave me the opportunity to fall in love with it first and then put in the hard work, which was really important for me.
So it took you a while to realize that, but afterwards, I mean, in the introduction, we talked about you writing a screenplay and authoring a book. How does that all come about?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey there, actually. So my writing journey really started when I was working as a performer. So I worked as a professional magician for a number of years. And I used to do street shows, and then I fell in love with the idea of doing stage work. And to do stage work, it's a lot more formal. So you had to write a script. So I wrote my first script, that bombed. Wrote my second one, bombed again, but it had good bones, and I was able to work with some people to, change some of the structure in it. Learned a lot from them, and have a quite successful show that I was quite proud of. And that was really my first kind of writing experience. And when I went to university, for business. I was at that time doing a bit more production in the entertainment industry and thought I wanted to grow a business. And I was, again, very fortunate that I went to St. Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia. And there they have this thing called the Tromble Room, which is one of the greatest secrets about St. FX and its success. And the Tromble Room is for people with learning disabilities. And when I entered on the first day, I was introduced to Elizabeth Kell, who at the time was the head of it. I'm not sure if she's still there. And at the welcome day, she pulled me aside. I was on her list of people that had said in their application they had a learning disability. She put her number in my phone, set up my email for me, all that. She knew because of my disability, I would not do that unless someone made me do it. And every week I got to have a meeting with her about how my education was going. And the trauma room also did work with the professors to make sure that they understood learning disabilities. They understood the challenges we were going through and understood the accommodations we needed, the rights we had, and why we had them. That it wasn't, we were getting something more than other people. We were just being put in the same spot for success. And I think because of that, St. FX was very welcoming to me. And the professors in what are tend to be more writing heavy and more reading heavy areas had a lot more understanding of what I was going through. And I felt a lot more secure telling them I had this disability and what my needs were. And it was amazing because I never had to really go through the center to get anything. Once they knew who I was, I'd ask them, I'd say, I need an extra week to work on this paper because the readings I'm doing are too heavy for it. And they say, 100% go take it. And then I met another life-changing figure in my life, Dr. Rod Banshees, who is to this day a very close friend of mine. Um, and he was the one who identified me as having a talent in social studies. And he pulled me aside and basically said, you could do business, you can make some good money, but I think you have more fun. I think you would have a much more fulfilled life if you worked in social studies. And he was 100% right. I switched into it, and he's a very strong writer. His partner is an English professor. And he identified, for obvious reasons, one of my greatest weaknesses was my writing capabilities and my reading capabilities. So he worked with me quite heavily personally on my writing, gave me the room I needed to be a better writer. He was very harsh on my writing, like he didn't hold back, which I think is something that a lot of people feel like you might need to do with people with learning disabilities. He didn't, tell me you're doing great, this is great, when it wasn't. He, I'd get my papers back and they'd just be full of red marks and full of the areas where he was willing then to sit down with me and show me, this is why your sentence structure is off, this is what you need to do here, and helped coach me to becoming a better writer. And he did the exact same thing with me with reading. We had a course that we did together, just me and him. And every week he would give me a master's level text. Sometimes I'd have to read a full book, and I'd show up and have to explain to him what I got from the book, had to give him a lecture on it. And then he would spend the second half of the class just explaining everything I missed, why I missed it, where my reading comprehension in that was lacking, and gave me this structure of, because he understood I wanted to be there, I wanted to do this. Things were a bit more difficult than me, gave me a lot of patience, but really gave me a structured space where I could become a better reader and where I felt safe doing it. I never felt, imposed by him. I felt like it was someone who was trying to help me and trying to challenge me to become a better analytical reader.
Do you try to pass on your experience to other people in any way?
I do. I've been trying a bit harder recently, hence one of the reasons why I'm here. Very early on, actually, in my second stage show I toured with, one of my favorite tricks that I did in it, and I wish I could say I came up with this idea myself, but it was another magician, Keith Brown, who gave me this idea when he found out I was dyslexic. But I would do a trick where I would turn an audience member dyslexic. I would take away their ability to read and make it 1 second they could read, the next second they couldn't. But I mixed that in with telling the story of dyslexia, my story with it, and about the issues with it, and getting people to understand how much we often take for granted our ability to just learn how to read and how to read. And that was a really powerful moment for me as well, because it was the first time I had really spoken publicly about it. And I found many people coming to me after the show who had dyslexia, and talking about how much that meant to them and how seen they felt, and seeing me there with a written show and understanding that. And that was one of those times that I realized, sharing my voice, sharing my experiences was important. And I think it's even more important now. I know I can hide my dyslexia quite easily. I have a computer, I have all the techniques I need that people won't just notice up front that I'm dyslexia. People are often quite shocked when I tell them I'm quite dyslexic. Like I really struggle still. But I think it's important to make sure that I share this with people and I share this with the world so the world can see people with this disability can succeed, and can often over succeed when given the opportunities. You just look at all the people that have dyslexia who have done amazing things in this world. It just goes to show that when we're given the chance, our brains just work differently. But we need to be given the chance to show that.
Is that the kind of thing that you would tell your grade three self if you had an opportunity to look back and pass along, I guess some tips?
Yeah, I think I would definitely tell them that. I think one of the bigger things I tell them is that I've learned from all the dyslexic people I've met and a lot of the reading I've got to do on it more recently, actually, about the way that it actually works, is that dyslexic people tend to be a strange bunch. Our brain works different. We tend to be quite artistic, quite different. And it's very much when people say it can be a gift or it is a gift, I very much think that's true. Dyslexic thinking is a thing. We put things together differently. Um, and sometimes being different is hard. It can be really, really hard. I was the artist kid. I was the kid who wanted to, grow up to be a magician. And I think the biggest thing I would tell my grade three self with that is something a circus performer once told me back in the day, and that's don't let anybody ever kick dust on your sparkles.
Well said. Um, how much of a part has technology played in managing your dyslexia?
Technology has been huge. Yeah. So I got my first computer when I was in grade six, and that was really big. That was back in the day when it was very odd to have a computer in the classroom. You didn't see that. It wasn't until I was in grade 12, I think, they started introducing Chromebooks into the schools. And that really helped me because it gave me the ability to actually write, to express myself. I still can't write by hand. So that's just not an opportunity for me. So having the computer there was huge. I have found that, there's been a million different technological things given to me to try and help me along. I think most dyslexic people from my time will remember Dragon Natural Speaking, which I don't think any of us actually ended up using. It was a great idea, but the tech wasn't there at the time. Um, but it's about finding the things that work for you and work with your habits, your routines that help kind of counteract some of the more negative effects. So for me, it's using a computer all the time. For me, I use some scheduling applications that I really love that help me with my organization. I use Grammarly, of course. Grammarly is huge. Grammarly saves lives. Um, oh, what else? The funny one, people laugh about this, is I use a typewriter, actually. That's a new one that I discovered a couple years ago. I had an ex-partner of mine buy me it as a gag gift because I was doing a lot of writing at the time. I like antiques. And I started writing with it. And I realized because I didn't write by hand, I had never had the experience of a thought going directly from your brain onto paper and being like this permanent thing in front of you. And it opened up a whole new world for me. Most of my book, the first draft was written on a typewriter. Most of my research that I do now, first drafts are written on typewriters because I realized it gave me that freedom most people have when writing notes of that there's only one direction forward. Like I write it and it's there. I can't backspace. I can't overthink what I'm doing. It's great for a first draft. It's just kind of weird when people see me working on it and I'm like, I swear this is actually it's a tool. I'm not just trying to look funny.
I love that though. That's amazing. And the idea of you using it at the beginning, when I was in school, we had electric typewriters and keyboarding was a class.
Hmm.
And actually a class I did pretty well in. But the idea that you're going and using that now and kind of having that kind of open up to you,
Hmm.
in a different time, in a different way, sounds very interesting.
Yeah, and so I have two working typewriters. I have my fun one, which is a bit more pretentious looking. It's a nice old one, belonged to my grandmother actually. And then I've got one I picked up from a thrift store a couple of years ago, which is one of the older, higher end electric ones that has the nice computer keyboard and types really well, but it's not as aesthetically pleasing.
And you don't have to pull out. Well, actually, I guess even with the electric typewriter, I was going to say you wouldn't have to pull out the white out as much, but maybe you do.
Oh, I just X over it and keep going. I don't care at this point. And I'll say actually technology wise, the thing that's nice with that is now with AI, it's super easy to just snap a photo of use the Apple scanning app and it just imports it into a Word document for me. So I don't even have to go back and retype it for a second time after I'm done the first draft.
So, are more books in your future at this point?
I'm hoping so. Yeah. So I finished the first one in it would be end of March, and it's just now, as I'm sure you know, as a reporter, the publishing world's a bit crazy. So just dealing with publishers right now, so I can't talk about who it's coming out with yet or the specifics with that, but I'm hoping it will be out in the next year. And that was a really fun one for me to write as well. It's a general audience book on AI called Artificially Intelligent, written at a grade 8 reading level to make AI more approachable to everyday people. And it was really fun because I got to write it as a story. And again, that was one of those things that I challenged myself to do. I'd always wanted to write a book, and it was difficult. It was hard. But as I got into it, I learned the skills, learned the techniques, and said, wow, that was a lot of fun. And it felt really empowering. So I'm hoping to write a couple more in the future. I'm hoping maybe to write one on dyslexia, actually, and learning disabilities and people's experiences with those, and the history of how they've been treated, but also the history of the people who have had them, that have overcome them, and the way that the dyslexic brain works, and how, in many ways, that can be a massive opportunity and a very different way of thinking that the average person doesn't really know about. And I'll just share, actually, if you don't mind, a brief story here about it that I thought was amazing. Was I had this, not really a dark secret, but I had this secret I kept from the time I was a little kid, of that the way I thought was very different. And I very quickly realized that other people did not think this way. They didn't have this thing going on in their brain that I did. And I thought it meant I was crazy. So I never told anybody. And then when I was in university, I had a friend who was also dyslexic. And he came up to me at one point and went, I think we were in our fourth year at the time. And he just said, David, you have a paracosm, don't you? Like, what's that? And then he described to me exactly the way I was thinking. I'm like, yeah, I have one of those. How did you know? And he's like, I have one too. And realized it's actually a very common way for people with dyslexia to think. And it's not just people with dyslexia, other people have them, but it tends to be more common. And it's the ability to build large standing three-dimensional worlds within your mind, worlds with their own logics, characters, people that exist. Almost, I describe it as, I'm pretty sure Tolkien had one. Because you can like have these characters and things that go on, and if one thing changes in the world, everything else changes to match it, and you can just go back and visit it whenever you want. And for me, with sociology and social theory, it's been really helpful because I can kind of take the theory that I learn and apply it within my brain, almost like running a simulation. It's not perfect. I'm not, a supercomputer or anything, but I can get ideas. And when I read theory, I can actually see theory. But that was something that I was using for a long time, that people were like, professors were commenting on my ability to do certain things, and I always felt ashamed to tell them how I was doing it. And now I'm much more open about it, and I've read a lot more stories of people with dyslexia opening up about three-dimensional thinking, the way that they can visualize 3D images, which has been directly associated with the dyslexic mind, and just these different ways of thinking that are skills, but that people were ashamed to talk about for a really long time.
Well, it's one thing to teach someone to read and write, but to be able to recognize some other ability that they may have beyond that is exciting because I mean it's one thing to learn those other things, but if you can harness the power as you seem to have and some of the other people we've had on this podcast, you can accomplish so much.
Yeah, no, and I really think that's true. And I think that's one of the biggest things when we talk about, like, Dyslexia Canada right now is doing some amazing work with policy. And it shouldn't be the way we think about this policy wise. It should just be thought of as a human right. However, I think, as a nation, if we think about that there's all this potential that is locked up in these people that have these different brilliant brains that think in such different ways, and that they're just not getting the chance to see that they have that potential. They're not getting the chance to leverage that because we're failing them so early on in the system. That if you just imagine if we unlock that potential, which is hidden in our country right now, which is hidden in the brains of so many youth that are getting left behind, the impact that can make on innovation, the impact that can make on new ideas, new art within our country it's unbelievable.
You were talking about writing about other people and their stories and their experiences. Have you come across other people outside of, the educators that you work with that have had dyslexia that have inspired you in some way or kind of helped broaden your thinking about dyslexia?
Wow, yeah. I need to think about that for a second. I've met a good number of people with it. I know there was a professor at my university who was an English professor who had dyslexia, and I never met him, but I heard about that, and that was a huge moment for me because everybody always talked about how brilliant of a writer he was, and that was one of those moments where I always said I'll get myself to the point where people can understand me and understand my ideas, and let my other skills take the wheel. But then hearing that an English professor, who the English professors thought might have been the best writer among them, was also dyslexic, I'm like, oh, I can get there too. Like if I have the tools, I can also be that level of writer. That was very inspiring. I recently met uh, a friend in when I was actually traveling in Argentina, and it turned out that she had dyslexia as well. We bonded right away, had many of the same experiences, and I don't want to just share her full story without her permission, but she was at an Ivy League school and petitioned them. Basically, there was an accommodation that she knew that she needed, that she wasn't like she felt like she could succeed at everything. She just had this one thing that had never been given and petitioned the school for it and wrote these huge documents to school, did all this research explaining what she needed, and the school gave it to her in the end. And that to me was inspiring of seeing someone take that initiative and take that power upon themselves to say, I know what I need to succeed here. Here it is, and actually arguing it at a level that this institution changed their ways to accommodate them. I mean, I have one of the other ones. I have one of my closest friends in the world who's also dyslexic, is doing his PhD right now in philosophy, and he reads more than any human being I've ever met in my life. Like the man, I think he might have said to me once that one of his first memories was reading Plato. Um, and again, he had a lot of support in his life. Came through, I think, a very similar story as me. Um, so being able to see, and again, also a brilliant writer, being able to see his success there, that was amazing. And of course, my two older brothers. Uh, I think one of the biggest things that I can give to people with dyslexia, and that I hope they know and I hope they gain from this, is that the belief that you can do something, or educators too, mainly educators and parents, the belief you can do something is a powerful thing. And I think that's what was never taken from me, is the belief that I could be intelligent, the belief that I could do these things, the belief that I could succeed was never taken away from me. When I said I wanted to write a book, there wasn't a single person who said, that's not for you. You probably won't be able to do it. When I said I wanted to go to university and do an honors degree, no one said that's hard for someone with dyslexia. I only ever was encouraged and told that I had the value and the abilities to do it. And I think having the role models around me, watching my two older brothers excel in high school, watching them go off excel in university, and then now watching them in both their jobs, which again are jobs that you wouldn't necessarily associate with someone who's dyslexic, rise to the top of their fields, and getting to see that and know that that can be you, that you have that ability. That is one of the most powerful gifts that was given to me. And not only everybody has that ability, but like Charles, that one teacher, having someone tell you you can, having someone tell you that you can do this, is a very empowering thing as a youth, because especially as young kids, as teenagers, you think you're invincible, you think you can do anything, and it's only when someone tells you you can't that you start thinking, well, maybe I can't do this. And just to come back around with one more story here, I think one of the more powerful moments in my story with dyslexia was when I was in a learning disability class. They had a different name for it at the time. I can't remember what it was called at the time. And the teacher was amazing. She was great. Uh, but it was for people that we weren't taking French. We didn't have to take first year French in high school because we had severe learning disabilities. So they put us in this class. And I remember one day, one of the kids eventually said, "Why are we all here?" And another kid answered, "Isn't it obvious? It's because we're stupid." And everybody just seemed to agree. And I remember sitting there, I remember coming home to my mom and being like, this happened. And I didn't know what to do because I'm like, I'm not stupid. And what's really sad with me with that story was how each and every one of them just seemed to have accepted that that they must have been told at some point or made to feel stupid by the education system, when really I'm sure that every student in that class had the opportunity not just to graduate high school very well, but to go on in other intellectual pursuits if they had wanted to, if that is what they desired to do. But the idea that at that age we were 13 years old, that they already had internalized that, that's something that's really hurt me and sat with me to this day. And that I want to make sure that other dyslexic youth don't have that feeling, that they come up knowing that they aren't stupid.
So, what kind of support would you like to see them have in school?
I think I'd like to start with, I'd like to see testing done in school. I would like to see uh, more diagnostic testing to identify students, especially because right now to get a diagnostic test, I think it costs about $3,000. And that's a massive inequality right there that kind of balances the playing field for people with more money there. So I'd like to see the early identification, and I'd like to see more evidence-based reading methods put in place that help people with dyslexia, that help people with different learning disabilities to make sure that they have the ability to learn, they have the ability to read, that they learn this in classrooms. And I think that's on the curriculum side. So I think curriculums need to change in Canada, and I'm happy here that is beginning to happen. But I also think just more awareness for the teachers. I'd like to see, educators want the best from their students. They want the best for their students. And if they don't know, if they haven't received the proper education to understand and identify students that have learning disabilities, and that may be like I was a kid, I always had to get out of my seat and like stand on the side of the desk if I wanted to write, and the teacher would be quite frustrated with me and probably thought I was just a problem, like in grade 1 and 2. But if they can learn to identify, kids with learning disabilities, and that we have these differences, and that, you know, we act differently, we learn differently, so that they can give them that belief, so they can instill that belief in them, so they can give them the help that they need. And I think that if teachers, have that education, if they have that knowledge, I mean, there's a reason they went into teaching. They want to help people. So when we empower them with that knowledge, with that training, with that education, they will gain that ability to help more kids, which to me, I think is a very simple thing we can do. I think, only just a couple classes or courses. I don't know what they receive right now, but I think more training for the teachers would be amazing.
Now, the learning hasn't stopped for you. You were talking a little bit earlier about learning French. How's that been?
Yeah, that has been quite the experience. That is actually, again, a change I would like to see in the education system. Because when I came up, not the fault of the teachers at all, but I could not learn French. And it's a well-held belief that people with dyslexia cannot learn French. And the reasoning is the way we teach it is not made for a person with dyslexia or with a learning disability. So I had to do it through elementary school, and they all just passed me along. They all, gave me the mark I needed to get to the next level because they're just like, he's dyslexic, he can't do it. Got to high school, got the exemption, and I thought I would never be able to learn French. As I got older, I really regretted that, and I'm very fortunate that the Pierre, Elliott, Trudeau Foundation, part of their scholarship is they provide a very generous amount of money to learn the second official language in Canada if you only have one. And it's been amazing because they've sent me 2 times now to St. Anne's University. It's a small university on the East Coast, and it's considered to be one of the best French language schools in the world. You do 5 weeks of intensive immersion. You sign a contract saying you're not going to speak any English for 5 weeks. They will kick you out if you do. It is a small town, so everybody in the town knows who doesn't belong, and they will rat you out if you speak English in a store. It is so intense, but everybody there is so lovely. They're so nice. They're so kind. One of the teachers there this year, who was a student the year before when I was there, he's dyslexic. And actually, he inspires me too. He is now a published poet writing poetry in French. He did not start learning French until high school. So I think that is absolutely amazing. But you just had all this support and all this amazingness. And now I can speak with people in French. I do some business emails in French. I'm going to be doing an interview in French for this podcast after this. I'm still learning. But one of the things that's really taught me again is how many things that, I had thought I would never be able to learn how to do because of my disability. And with this program, I've seen that no, I can learn French. Actually, I can be really good at learning French. I can learn it really quickly if I'm taught in a way that suits my needs. So that's been really exciting and being a really fun, really empowering thing to be working on. And I think it's really important for everybody in Canada to learn French. I think it's difficult to fully understand the Canadian experience without understanding French because we have this contract in our country that we are a bilingual country. And I think especially for English people, English Canadians, we haven't held up our end of the bargain. And once you start learning French, I know to me it was kind of pitched as you should learn French so if you want to work in the government, you can work in the government. That's how it was pitched. And I'm like, I don't want to work in the government. Um, but now I've realized that it's much more important than that. That language is, or culture is embedded in language. And as I've started learning French and started spending more time with my Quebecois friends and my Acadian friends, both of whom's history I had studied in English during my undergraduate degree, I realized I did not understand their history because their history was embedded in the language and issues that I saw in the news about, issues going on in Quebec or, Acadian issues that I didn't understand or I thought I understood. Suddenly it took on a whole new meaning for me. And I started understanding my country in a whole new way. And it's just kind of built upon itself of that. I felt very un-Canadian for a moment when I started learning French, when I started realizing I had this deficiency here, this lack of knowledge about my own nation. So it's been super exciting for me and super empowering.
Inspirational indeed, my friend. So what's next for you?
What's next for me? Well, I've got lots of stuff going on right now. Well, I'm currently working on my PhD at the University of Ottawa. I'm studying under David Murakami Wood, who's the Canadian Research Chair in Surveillance Studies. So I'm doing AI-based research there. So I'm continuing that, defending my thesis proposal in a couple of weeks here. So that's taken up a lot of my time right there. Lots of work getting done on the book, trying to get that out there to people. And I've just been given a lot more public talks about AI, which has been really empowering and a lot of fun. I've got lots of a million little things on my plate here. I'm very blessed and thankful that my life is taking me in such an interesting direction. And every day I kind of get to work on a new project. New projects come through the email inbox that sometimes I take too many of them and have to really cut back or not sleep. But yeah, I'm not sure what's next. I've kind of stopped making plans now because every time I make a plan, the universe laughs and throws me in a different direction. But I like to say I'm never where I want to be, but I always seem to be exactly where I need to be. So I'm just riding the wave right now.
David, this has been a great conversation. Thanks so much for sharing your story here on the Market Red podcast today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for doing this. I think it's a really important project.